She was only 18, and her first breakup shattered her heart in a way she didn't think was possible. She tore the last letter with the same pain you tear a dream apart, then walked into her room with a silent vow never to come out again. No one knew, but in that moment, the world lost a part of her. How do we return to ourselves when love takes everything? This story begins with Ellie standing at her bedroom door, the torn letter still in her hand. She was only 18, and that first heartbreak didn't just break her heart. It undid the part of her that still believed she was whole. She stepped in like someone entering a dark cave, timeless, pointless, past the point of return. The room became silence, a colorless cocoon, and she let herself stay there, motionless, absent, forgotten. She didn't want to cry in her mother's lap or hear advice from friends. She turned off her phone and disappeared into the room, the same one where she learned to read, to dance alone, to draw stars on the wall. Now, every corner felt like proof that everything she was had stopped right there. The crooked lamp he once complimented, the oversized shirt she wore when they were together, the book she started and never finished. Each was a frozen memory. His presence still lingered in things. The days passed like they were all the same. She ate little, spoke less, slept out of exhaustion, not peace, laid down on the same side of the bed he used to like. Still. The wrinkled sheet carried the weight of a body that was no longer there, but it felt like the emptiness was still sleeping next to her. The pillow still smelled like the last movie they watched. And as much as she told herself to forget, Ellie kept sinking into the sound of silence. Her father knocked, but didn't insist. Her mother left tea on a tray, sometimes little notes. But Ellie didn't read them. She wanted to be forgotten, and at the same time, secretly hoped someone would see her disappearing. The room became both shelter and prison, a place where no one asked anything of her anymore, but where nothing could reach her either. Sometimes she thought of leaving, just thought. Her body didn't follow. That morning, the sun crept through the curtains, but she didn't have the strength to pull them aside. She simply turned her face to the wall and shut her eyes. Life hurt more in the light. Time moved on outside. But for Ellie, everything was still stuck on the day he left. She felt like she was fading. It wasn't dramatic. It was physical. Like when a light bulb begins to flicker and no one notices. The days pressed down on her like a blanket too heavy to lift. She didn't cry anymore, didn't think of him clearly anymore. And that, instead of relief, hurt the most. The absence was now inside. She couldn't tell where he ended and where she had disappeared. She tried eating a cracker. It had no taste. Tried listening to an old song. But the lyrics felt like a foreign language. Tried remembering the sound of her own laugh, and couldn't. The room, once filled with painful memories, now felt like an empty frame. She was still there, but she wasn't whole anymore. For the first time she felt afraid. Not afraid of not moving on, but afraid of never returning, of having lost something essential. Like a part of her was left behind, before the first kiss, before the first surrender, before she loved someone like love was home. And she, a guest. Nothing outside changed that day, but inside, Ellie reached the bottom, and what she found there was silence. That week, Ellie started moving like someone afraid of being noticed. Her steps shortened, her gestures slowed. She walked inside the room like apologizing to the floor, as if every sound she made would reveal that she still existed. She stopped brushing her hair, stopped changing clothes. Her pajamas were no longer sleepwear. They were second skin. And the mirror in the corner became a passive enemy. She passed it sideways, never brave enough to face what remained of her own face. Her mother, with tenderness that hurt, kept leaving tea at the door. Sometimes cookies, sometimes short notes like whispers. Just a hello is okay. Ellie read them all, but didn't reply. Silence felt safer, as if answering meant admitting she was still there, and she wasn't sure anymore. One night, hunger won. She got up with a stiff body and took the plate left hours before, sat on the floor, back to the door, and ate with her hands. The food was cold, the taste far away. But that act, eating on her knees, hidden, made something inside her hurt in a new way. As if, for a second, she realized how much of herself she had forgotten. She knew she was fading. But a part of her, tired, hopeful, and cruel, still believed that if she disappeared enough, he would come back. That he'd miss her. That he'd ask about her. And when that happened, she would know what to say. But he never came back, and time kept taking the part of her that waited. The bed stopped being shelter and became a hole. The nights, once a relief, became a test. That's when longing dragged the hardest. Ellie slept in twisted positions, seeking comfort from pillows that gave none. Sometimes she hugged her own body, as if it could still offer warmth. Other times, she lay awake in the dark, repeating phrases so she wouldn't forget who she was. My name is Ellie. I'm 18. This isn't forever. But none of those words reached the center. It was like screaming in a well with cotton-covered walls. She stopped remembering the sound of her own voice. And that, more than anything, terrified her. One day she lay down and didn't want to get up again. Not because she wanted to vanish, but because she didn't know how to return. And so, in silence, she let the world forget her. Because holding on hurt more, and pretending to be strong, she no longer knew how. The days that followed came without form. They had no name, no color, no scent. Ellie started losing track of time, didn't know if it was Tuesday or Friday, if she had slept for 2 hours or 2 days. The room was no longer a place. It was a separate time, where pain stacked in invisible layers. She began performing small, involuntary rituals, ran her fingers along the chipped rim of the mug she'd used since childhood, pressed the TV remote without turning it on, left the lamp on only until the sun fell, as if darkness was the only fitting stage for what she felt. One day, pulling the bottom drawer of the dresser, she found a blue-covered notebook. It had been there for years, alongside broken pencils, dried-out pens, star stickers. It was from when she was 8. The first page showed a drawing of her in an astronaut helmet, floating on a lilac planet. Next to it, in crooked letters, "When I grow up, I'll discover planets and live on one where no one feels pain." She flipped through slowly. One page showed a theater with bright lights. "I want to be an actress." Another had a dance studio. "I also want to be a ballerina." On the last page, a letter to the moon. Her imaginary friend. "Don't forget me, okay?" Reading that, her chest tightened. In front of her own words, Ellie didn't feel tenderness. She felt loss. An unbearable longing for someone who was still her, but who had left a long time ago. The girl who dreamed of changing the world, who believed she could fly, who thought being loved was something natural. Where was she now? She closed the notebook carefully, like sealing a time capsule that could no longer be touched. None of it made sense anymore. Astronaut, ballerina, actress. The world now felt too small for such big dreams. And she, too small to fit in any dream at all. Even breathing felt unjustifiable. Life had lost shape, meaning, direction. The music had stopped. Her phone remained off. Life on the other side of the door kept its rhythm. A pot on the stove, a barking dog, a neighbor's car returning. But inside, everything was still. Silence was no longer a choice. It had become a condition. She looked at her hands and they felt far away, as if they weren't hers. She didn't feel like drawing, or writing, or even screaming. The anger was gone. So was the longing. What remained was a deep fatigue, an emptiness that didn't ask for space. It took all of it. She started avoiding even the good memories, because they hurt more than the bad ones. Recalling a smile, a trip, a whispered, "Stay a little longer on the couch," was like pulling a thread that she already knew where it led, to the end. And in that end, she was no longer whole. That's when she understood. The hardest absence wasn't his. It was her own. Ellie no longer knew where she had placed herself when the pain began, and now she didn't know how to find herself again. What if she never came back? That was the question that remained. After the silence, after the notebooks, after looking at herself and not recognizing even the memories, what if that quiet absence, that stillness, was all that was left of her? Because deep down, what remained in that room wasn't just a girl locked inside. It was someone who seemed to be abandoning every dream she'd ever had. The girl who wanted to fly, to dance, to change the world. The girl who believed she could be everything, now didn't know if she could be anything at all. Ellie didn't know if she'd ever get out of there, if there was still a spark inside her that could begin again. What do we do with what's left when almost everything is gone? Let's find out. But first, if this story is making sense to you, if it resonated with you in any way, subscribe to the channel so we can keep telling stories like this. And before we continue, leave your like. Thank you for your support. The back pain had been growing. Ellie could barely move. She spent her days lying down, turning from side to side, trying to find any position that hurt a little less. That morning, the discomfort became unbearable. She decided to grab one more pillow, anything that might ease the weight she felt in her body. And maybe the rest of her too. She climbed up on a chair with effort, opened the high cupboard where her mother kept extra pillows, mixed in with old blankets. The smell of mildew arrived before the fabric. She pulled out the first pillow she saw. When she moved it aside, an envelope slipped out from behind and hit the floor with a soft thud. As she bent down, Ellie recognized it instantly. Her own name, written in her mother's handwriting, a handwriting she hadn't seen in a long time. The paper was slightly yellowed, the fold sharply creased, and the memory returned like a movie. She was 12. They had fought, badly. Her mother tried to talk, but Ellie locked herself in her room. Hours later, the letter was slid under the door. Her mom only said, "Whenever you're ready." But Ellie never was. She stashed it in the back of the closet, never read it. Now, 6 years later, the envelope reappeared, as if it had waited for this exact moment. She sat on the floor, slowly, the letter in her hands. She wasn't in a rush, or afraid. It felt like she knew what was inside wasn't just memory. It was a part of her that needed remembering. She opened it. The handwriting was steady, clear, and the words more intimate than she was ready to read. Her mother started by saying she knew Ellie was intense, that she felt everything deeply, that she cried over things no one else even noticed. She said that sometimes this scared people, but it was never a flaw. It was just the way she was whole. In the letter, her mom wrote about the days Ellie pretended to float with her arms outstretched, saying she was an astronaut. How she spent whole afternoons drawing planets, explaining the rules of worlds where no one lied and no one left without saying why. She wrote about the pink tulle dress Ellie wore to dance in the living room, declaring she'd be a ballerina, and the time she wrote a note to the moon, in crooked letters, asking not to be forgotten. Her mother said those dreams weren't just childish. They were living parts of her. They were how Ellie moved through the world, creating, feeling, trying to make sense of even the pain. She said that even if life tried to teach otherwise, Ellie didn't need to give up any of that to be loved. And she ended with a simple sentence, but one Ellie had never heard so clearly. You've always been enough. You don't have to shrink to fit inside anyone. There, on the floor of the room where she'd been disappearing for weeks, something opened inside Ellie. A space that had been locked. A voice that was hers, but had been silent for far too long. She didn't cry, but she breathed differently, as if, after all this time hidden, she had finally taken in air with depth. It wasn't the end of the pain, but it was the first gesture of someone who might, one day, want to exist again. The next morning, Ellie woke before the sun had entered. It was still early. The room was quiet as always. But something in her felt different. It wasn't lightness or clarity. Just a small desire to feel the air somewhere other than the bed. She sat up slowly, like testing her body for the first time. Her back still hurt, but less numb. She placed her feet gently on the floor, grabbed a loose sweater from the corner of the chair, tied her hair in a messy bun, like she used to, before everything. Then walked to the window. Her steps were slow, but steady, as if each one whispered, "I'm still here." She pulled the curtain open. The sun was beginning to touch the rooftops. The light entered the room without asking permission. It hit her face, her swollen eyes, her pale hands. And Ellie didn't turn away. She stood there, letting the light reach her. For the first time in weeks, she didn't look away. She stayed there for a few minutes, in silence, watching the street. The neighbor's dog ran back and forth. A man passed by on a bike. A car slowly pulled out of a driveway. It was Sunday. The world kept going. And now, so did she. Ellie opened the window. The cold air brushed her face, and she breathed in, deeply. Once. Twice. She didn't smile, but it didn't hurt. And that already meant so much. She went back to the bed, but didn't lie down. She sat on the edge, facing out, like someone about to stand again. In that moment, she wasn't the Ellie who danced in the living room, nor the one who wrote to the moon. She still didn't know if she could dream of planets again. But she was standing. She was alive. And slowly, she was beginning to remember that. Later, Ellie made herself a cup of tea. Alone, without hurry. She took the old drawing notebook and left it open on the bed, on the page of the lilac planet. She didn't know if she still wanted to be an astronaut. But she liked remembering that once, she believed in it with her whole body. She sat on the porch step, wrapped in the old hoodie she wore on rainy afternoons. The late afternoon light was yellow, almost golden. The sun stretched long shadows across the floor, and the wind played with loose strands of her hair. She wasn't thinking about going back to her old life. That Ellie didn't exist anymore. But the one sitting there now, quiet, alert, still a little hurt, was beginning to feel her own weight differently in the world. It still hurt. But it wasn't just pain. The world outside remained the same, but she didn't. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like a beginning.